And there's a story you tell in the book
Yeah.
about being at a event where you're giving one of the bazillion keynote speeches that you give,
Yes.
and a survivor of sexual abuse comes up to you. Can you share that story?
Yeah, so I was speaking at a conference on sexual assault, and I'm a sexual assault survivor. And I give the presentation, and when it's over, people are responding really well. And then I'm standing there in this line, which I know you are used to, and there's a long line of people waiting to kind of share their response or their connection to what you said. And I see toward the back of the line this woman who we would say had a bad attitude, right? But I know attitude is despair. But
Hold on a second. Attitude is despair?
yeah. So a form of depression people often don't recognize is irritable depression, right? Yeah.
Wow.
And people don't respond to compassion to women with a quote unquote bad attitude. But if we said, when I see that woman, she's in despair, maybe then I would respond with compassion. But some of us, by family, by culture, by religion, were taught that sadness is weakness. So we mask our sadness with anger, with bitterness, with attitude, right? But underneath it is the despair.
It's so true.
Yeah.
It's like an iceberg. You see the anger on the top, but there's something so much deeper going on.
So much deeper underneath.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you could pick up on the attitude and the energy.
But I know there's the story there.
Yeah.
Right? Especially because when you know you haven't done anything, right? So I am feeling on the receiving end of your upset, and I haven't done anything, so that I know there's a story.
Yeah.
So, when it gets to be her place, she's next in the line, and she says to me with the attitude, so you're a survivor? And I say, look, I just gave a whole keynote on it, right? I say, yes. And she says, well, you don't look like any survivor I've ever known. So the doubting can be triggering as we think about not being believed. But then I go deeper than that and decide not to get defensive. Instead, I just let her question/statement hang in the air. And I just, what I would say, soften, right? I soften and I just look at her, and it's like now she can see me. Like on the stage with my PowerPoint and my pantsuit, she couldn't see me, right? She could only see the strength and the oratorical skills.
Yeah.
But now standing in front of her, kind of woman to woman, she could see the vulnerability. And seeing the vulnerability, she said, the only survivors I've ever known were fat and poor like me. Right? So then it's the different ways our surviving shows up. And for some of us who are often overlooked, we coped with busyness and with what I would call a spirit of excellence. And when you are excellent, people don't notice your wounds. And sometimes you don't notice them. You feel you've outrun it.
Yes.
But it's there late at night, early in the morning, when you're in certain environments, it shows up that it's still bleeding and you've just gotten busy but not healed.
What's the difference? I guess, what is healing?
Yeah. So it is the homecoming of being accepting and loving of myself. When I accept me, I have nothing to prove. There's a life coach here in Los Angeles. I'm gonna give you her name later, but she has a beautiful quote I love, which is, I don't want to be driven, I want to be called. And this idea of like when you're driven, your trauma can drive you.
Yeah.
Like your insecurity can, where you have to constantly prove yourself, and it's this franticness versus when I'm at home, then I can be in flow with what is me. Yeah.
Wow. If you have somebody in your life who has that irritable depression,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
how do you practice softening
Yes.
and compassion? Because oftentimes if you're around somebody who's constantly irritable,
Mm-hmm.
who is always angry about or frustrated with something, I have
Yeah.
several people that come to mind right now in my own life.
Yeah.
What are some tools
Mm-hmm.
that we can use
Right.
to practice more compassion in those moments so that
Yeah.
we lead with compassion rather than get so reactive?
Right. And I love that question because I think what we often get pulled into is being combative with them, and they're always going to out-combat us because they're in warrior mode, right?
Right.
And so, when they come with the intensity, then I respond to the softness, and I would say one of two ways. One is if I can relate at all, I'll give my own experience, right? And that helps them not to feel judged, right? I'm not saying like calling you out because I see what you're doing. It's just saying, there was a time where, and whatever that story is, and often I have learned transparency is contagious. And sometimes then people say, oh, me too, right? And I'm like, yeah, you too. You too. So the testimonial, or if I know anything that's been happening in their life, to name that, to say, because they're responding with all this intensity about distraction.
Right.
So then I will say, well, I really wanted to check in because I know this is such a busy time with you, that you're moving, that you're this, that you're that. And for us to ask a deeper question, because the how are you gives us finding you.
Yeah.
Right. So break out of the script. And so instead, with everything you're holding, what's been helping you to manage, right? Or what do you need? Or how can I help?
Yeah.
So I'm speaking to the unspoken.
If you bring in the chicken and the eagle, can we use that fable to describe that moment where the survivor in the audience has this irritable, depressive moment with you?
Right.
What is happening for her, in your opinion, as a psychologist?
Yeah. So I like to say the reason you feel unsettled is because you're not supposed to settle.
Say that again?
The reason you feel unsettled is because you're not supposed to settle. So what area of your life are you settling?
And I would imagine that any area where you feel unsettled.
Right. There it is.
There it is.
So, what happens is often we are focused so much outwardly, if only my spouse would do this, if only my kids would do this, if only my supervisor would do this. And in this moment, we don't have the capacity to shift them. So how might you want to shift? Right.
That's a big ask, because it's easier to try to order everybody else around in your life.
And frustrating and annoying and draining, but it also lets me off the hook because I can keep waiting for their homecoming, right? I can come home to myself when they come home to themselves. Well, everybody is on their own timing. And what I like to remind myself is I don't want to keep my healing hostage waiting for the healing of those who harmed me.
Oh, wow.
And that's what we're doing when we're like waiting for the apology.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't heal till you see what you did to me.
Yes.
Like, that could be years.
It might be your whole lifetime.
It may be your whole life, right? They have gone on with their lives. They don't care. They're not thinking about it. And so I want to take my healing out of their hands.
And give it back to yourself.
Yeah.
And so the process of coming home and the homecoming is the act of self-healing.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
about joining back in with yourself. Because we have such a huge international audience and therapy can be very expensive. I would love for you to read these 6 questions that you often ask patients.
Yeah.
That can be a sign of what you call psychological homelessness. And so I would also love for you, Dr. Tama, to talk about what is psychological homelessness. I've never heard that phrase before, but it makes so much sense.
So psychological homelessness is this sense of wandering, being ungrounded, unrooted, confused. And we can spend years saying, I don't know, I'm not sure. And even when I'm waiting for other people to give me the answer, then they're my compass. But I need a compass. 'Cause that's what we talk about with therapy, is at some point people need to internalize it. So it's not just every week people coming and saying, so Tama, what do you think?
Yeah.
Right? They have to get to the point where I was having this conversation with my sister and I realized I was doing this. And so well, there it is. Right now you have become your compass, right? So here are the questions. Does the state of your life, internally or externally, fall short of what you imagined? Did you attain what you thought you wanted, only to discover that you still feel empty and unfulfilled? Do you have a sense of powerlessness or hopelessness? Do you lack the energy or motivation to pursue the things that used to matter to you? Do you feel there are no words to capture the ache in your heart? Do you find yourself crying often, or does it seem impossible to cry?
If somebody resonates with any of those questions,
Yeah.
what should they do?
Yes. So I want to first say to anyone who connected with those, you've taken the first step, which is awareness. Because I can't come home to myself if I don't realize I'm wandering.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes we don't realize it. Time is passing and you don't know it. So the fact that in this moment, as you're listening, you chose to tell yourself the truth. That is your mind, heart, body, spirit telling to you, we're ready, right? Because when we don't feel ready, we're distracting ourselves, we're busying ourselves, and then truth shows up. So telling yourself the truth is the first step. And then we think about both self-care and community care. And sometimes when we don't feel good about ourselves, we neglect ourselves and we erase ourselves. And those can have cultural messages and gender messages and religious messages where people will say self-care is selfish.
Right.
And so to say to myself, I am not just a tool for other people's nourishing. I am not just a pathway for other people to get goodness in life. That I too am a living soul that is deserving of the goodness that I want other people to experience. And so it is a sacred act to begin to care for ourselves. And the catch is, when we talk about behavioral psychology, with behavioral psychology, you start to do the action even if you don't feel it yet, right? So if I say, I'm going to wait till I have high self-esteem and then take good care of myself, it's not going to work.
Right.
So I have to start doing it even when I don't feel it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. What do you, the word that keeps coming to mind is purpose. So you hear a lot of people say, I don't know what my purpose is. I need to find a purpose. Is that a code word for I am disconnected from myself?
That is definitely a code word, and the name came back to me of the life coach I quoted. So I just want to give Shannon Yvette is the one who gave the quote I said earlier. But when people don't have a sense of their purpose, that's an indication of disconnection. I also want to say when we are in unhealthy relationships and on toxic jobs, in order to survive those, you have to disconnect. It's impossible to be at home with yourself and stay in relationship with someone who is dishonoring you perpetually.
Wow.
Yeah.
So for somebody that just had like
Yes.
a wake-up call,
Then you can have compassion for yourself, because people will judge you and say, like, why'd you stay so long?
right?
But you weren't connected to you. You had been disconnected from yourself, so you don't even feel the capacity to dream again, to imagine, to believe that better is possible for you and that you are deserving of it and worthy of it.
We see this both in relationships and jobs all the time.
All
In fact,
the
you have a
time.
whole chapter
Yes.
about how to handle a toxic work environment.
That's right.
So if somebody is listening to this and they're on their way in to a job that is slowly just draining their soul,
Right.
the first step is to acknowledge it
Yeah.
and to recognize that you're disconnected from yourself. And you already gave us the way that you would know.
Right.
Any area that you are unsettled in, that does not feel cohesive, that is where you're settling. That's a point of disconnection. You talked to us about breathing.
Yeah.
Close your eyes, come back into your body. You've talked also about self-care. What does that mean,
Right.
self-care?
Yeah. So self-care is nourishing every part of yourself. So there is the physical part. So it is hard to heal and come home to yourself if you're living out of vending machines and drive-through windows,
Why?
because your food affects your mood. And there's nothing life-giving in fake food. So, as I like to say, as your grandmother would say, like, put some vegetables on that plate, put some greens on that plate. So fruit and vegetables, I like to think of, before I eat something, can I say, I'm eating this because I love myself? Then some things I won't be able to put in my body because I actually want to live. And we have it flipped where we will call those things the treat. I am treating myself by giving myself something that's killing me. So to have to flip it. And of course, in moderation, because when people hear that, they're like, do you mean I can never have, right? So and drinking water instead of all the soda. Sleep is a big one. It is hard to come home to yourself when you're exhausted. You know, we are busy, and then all night people are on their phones or, up and can't sleep. And I say, if your idea, and hopefully this is okay to say.
You can say whatever you want.
Yes. If your idea of relaxing before you go to sleep is watching 3 episodes of Law and Order, I would encourage you to think about, why is trauma relaxing to me?
Oh.
That's what it is. I mean, it's harm, crime, violation, attacks, and that's what is going to soothe me into my bedtime.
So what is the answer that a lot of people give you when they do go into therapy about that connection?
Is that it's normal and familiar. Some of us grew up in high stress, so we think calmness is either fake or boring.
Wow.
Right? People mistake peace for boring. And it's like, to come home to yourself, you have to lean into the discomfort because it's going to feel unfamiliar. I was working with a client, an adult woman and her mom, and they had been disconnected because the mother dealt with addiction and didn't raise her, but they are reconnected now and living together. And the adult daughter really wanted her mom to say she loves her. And the mother just said to me, that just seems fake. So she had not grown up with that, had not heard it. To her, it's like something people do on TV. And so I said to her, if you mean it, it's not fake. It just feels like it because you're not used to saying it.
It is amazing how many people don't tell the people that they love that they love them.
Right.
And it hadn't occurred to me it's because they never were told that themselves.
Yeah.
And that it might feel forced or not authentic.
Yes.
Whoa.
Yeah. And that's the importance of us learning each other's love languages, because, you know, her response was the response of probably many of her generation, which was you had food on the table or you have a roof over your head.
Yes. What more do you want from me?
Right. What more?
What more? Today, it is going to be one hell of a profound conversation. I just feel it in my bones because I'm going to introduce you to this woman named Dr. Tama Bryant. Our conversation today is going to help you connect with the truth of who you are. Even if you've never truly met the most powerful version of yourself, she says you can always come back home to yourself.